Welcome to Hickory Street Podcast. It's been a while since I've done an episode, but I recently got my wisdom teeth taken out. So that was kind of an experience. um, I woke up in the middle of it. Not fun. I was like, they were pulling out the last tooth, and I woke up while they were pulling out the tooth, and then I felt them stitch it up. So it was definitely pretty rough there for a while. They had to drill into my gum to get one tooth out because it wasn't coming out, and so I think they were having some hard times because whenever I woke up, they told me that I have really strong bones and it was taking them a little bit longer than they anticipated. So, it ended up not really panning out as well as I thought it was. And so the healing process has been a little bit longer. Like, I got it done on Wednesday, and it's Sunday now, and I just now, stopped bleeding. So, it's still really sore, and I can't really eat solid food yet still. So, not a fun time, but thankfully it didn't hurt nearly as bad as I thought it was going to. Like, whenever my girlfriend took me home, she I was like awake the entire car ride, and she was like amazed that I was awake, and I remember most of it. And whenever I got home, I think I slept for like 2 hours or 3 hours. I woke up and I just couldn't go back to sleep, and she was sort of amazed that I was even awake. So, and I was walking around my apartment, and everything was fine. So, I'm not sure exactly why it happened that way, but hey, I mean, I'm not complaining. But so World War One, this time kind of down out from work has given me more time to read my World War One book, and so I figured I would make an episode about some of the stuff I've been reading in World War One, because it's really interesting and a lot more complicated than people might think. So, World War One. So it started with Franz Ferdinand's assassination. And I'm going to fact check myself real quick. I believe it was Prussia. Okay, yeah. Austria declared war on Serbia. Let's see. I know Prussia was involved. Yeah, okay, so Prussia was invaded at the beginning of the war. Okay, yeah. So, Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. And the reason he was assassinated was kind of complicated. It had a lot to do with political deference, essentially. Franz Ferdinand was not the bloodline succession to take the throne. At least he wasn't perceived to be that way. He was the cousin of a monarch, and I believe he was married in. And it caused a lot of political strife, and Serbia was sort of blamed for the assassination, and they had some political actors kind of deep underground, and I can't remember their names off the top of my head, but they essentially did conspire to assassinate Franz Ferdinand, and it mainly had to do with the fact that there was a Serbian citizen that essentially was trying to make stake to the claim of Austria, and it caused a lot of crazy propaganda to be instituted at the end of the at the near the beginning of World War I, and there was something called the Austrian ultimatum, I think. Yeah, Austrian ultimatum, that essentially would have forced Serbia to take responsibility for the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. And not only would it force Serbia to publicly announce that they were responsible for the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, but also it would have relinquished the Serbian court system from trying the conspirators, because they were caught. Now there's speculation as to whether or not more people were involved than just these two people, and I can get the names real quick. I'm going to start fact-checking myself, because it'll help get this podcast more up to speed. This is all stuff I read at like a long time ago when I first started reading this book, probably like 4 months ago. So, Serbian... Gavrilo Princip? Yes. Yes. Gavrilo Princip. So, he was the main person that was captured, and so Gavrilo Princip was the main person that was captured for the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, and he was sort of he became like in the middle of this negotiation between Austria and Serbia, because what started happening is that Serbia created a bunch of propaganda blaming Austria, and Austria created a bunch of propaganda blaming Serbia, and it became really difficult for the general population, who was just getting their news from the media outlets, to make sense of this whole deal, because there were a lot of people in Austria that were upset about Franz Ferdinand taking over as monarch. They were not happy about that because it went against their tradition of some sort. So, and apparently a lot of his policies were really unpopular. So, how did this escalate to World War One? The simple question is that, the simple answer to that question is that it was a bunch of different European countries, specifically Germany and Russia, that essentially saw this as an opportunity to make their name for themselves around the rest of the world as like being a dominant political power. But the more honest answer really comes down to fear, because you start to see how Germany who already had a large army, starts ramping up their military production and starts making deals almost immediately. And the Chancellor of Germany, let me get his name real quick. The Chancellor of Germany during World War One, Theobald von Bethmann, yes. Yeah, that's him. Sorry, Google's giving me a bunch of different options. But, so you start to see how he makes a lot of these economic deals with surrounding countries, specifically like Britain and Italy, and even France at one point. I think they signed a treaty before war broke out, essentially promising not to invade, and they like quickly broke that treaty. And so Germany like made all of these secret alliances, and one of them being with the United States as well. I think we were sending arms we were going to send arms to Germany before the start of the war, and then whenever war broke out, we rescinded that and started sending arms to Britain. But you see a lot of like higher ups, and I can't remember all of their names, but in this book it goes into all their names. There's so many names in this book. It's ridiculous. It's too much to keep track of. And a lot of the times it's just like, oh, this person did this one really important thing, and then they never talk about them again. So that's why I'm having a hard time with names whenever it comes to this book in particular. But anyway, so there were a few different German higher-ups who were like advising him not to make these alliances and to try to stay out of it because it was really unpopular from the German people. But in his diaries, he makes several entries about how Germany has always been sort of the laughing stock and the most vulnerable in the European countries because of their location being kind of smack dab in the middle. So he devises this plan, which is sort of the original Blitzkrieg, where he intends to invade in the east, take over France, and then invade in the west and start to move westward. So, I might have that backwards. It might be west and east. But anyways, that's essentially what his plan becomes. And Italy is probably one of the last countries to join World War I. And they kind of join mainly out of necessity, like just from a historical standpoint, because all of this conflict is going on right near their borders. And so there's an argument to be made that Italy really only joined the war because Germany was so close to Italy. But anyways, this war was so significant because of technology. At this point, there were the use of the tank and trench warfare was extremely unique, and also the use of gas was extremely unique. These technological advances caused for soldiers to be able to be 10 times more effective during war. And there were actually horses that were still used in World War I. And it was mainly because some of the countries did not have access to tanks. And so Britain at this time had a very, very, very small army and did not want to get involved in this war, like at all. So they tried to stay out of it as long as they could. There were several different letters that were being written on the onslaught of the Austrian ultimatum. And whenever news of the Austrian ultimatum reached Theobald from Germany, there were several of his advisors that sort of celebrated because they thought that it was going to be something that Austria could easily, or that Serbia could easily agree to, and would prevent war. Because like I said, it was extremely unpopular in Germany. And what you see happen is that instead of Theobald taking that piece of advice from his advisor and sort of backing off as the Austrian ultimatum becomes known, he decides to go ahead and invade France. So he starts his invasion in France. Now at this time in Austria and Serbia has not openly disagreed to the ultimatum. They sort of play this like public political game of hot potato, where they keep passing the responsibility over to Austria, and Austria keeps passing the responsibility over to Serbia. and publicly. They're both just blaming each other, and then these small militias. That's really what they were. They weren't full armies yet. These small militias start having skirmishes here and there. It's like 5 people killed, 10 people killed, 20 people killed. Here and there, I think Austria like blew up a school and killed a bunch of kids. And that was sort of like the big public event that sort of sparked a lot of outrage and concerns for war. And simultaneously, as that was sort of happening, Germany just decides to invade France. And they have a treaty with Russia that they signed. And upon invading France, this treaty with Russia breaks down, and Russia continues to send Germany arms for like the first 2 months of the war, and then Germany starts making moves to invade the eastern part of Europe, which threatens Russia's territories. So then Russia pulls their funding, and then it's all-out war between Germany and Russia. And so what's really unfortunate is that like news didn't travel very well. So Britain gets a lot of delayed messages. The invention of the telegraph helps for things to go a little bit quicker, but Britain has a delayed response. Mainly because their military is small, and they're still believing in a peace that doesn't exist anymore. You see that there are a lot of British officials that are sort of naive whenever it comes to their statements in Parliament, and don't really understand the scale of what's happening and what's about to happen. So I'm going to try to find out real quick. Prime Minister during World War I. Okay, David Lloyd George. Yes. Okay, that name looks very familiar. So, David Lloyd George ends up taking the lead on getting an army created, and creates an agreement with the United States. We give them a lot of ammunitions and private support in the form of just money and funding. So they hit the battlefield to protect France. That's where they send all of their troops first. And within like the first 2 or 3 weeks, the British army is just decimated. They only show up with something like 2,000 troops or 3,000 troops. And by the end of the first week, they're already down to like 500 of their own troops. And so they send another shipment of like 3,000 or 4,000. And then within another week, there's only like 1,000 of their troops left. So the British Army are really not very... They're not a main actor early on in the war. it's not until probably the last 2 years of the war that they really become a player, and it's mainly because of their naval fleets. They they are able to combat the German submarines that are sending arms, or that are destroying uh, American shipments of arms to Britain. So they're able to combat that quite a bit, but it's not until like almost 2 years into the war. It's a real big problem. And as the war progresses and trails into North Africa, you start to see a lot of African countries pleading to Britain and France that have, and even Germany, that have influence in the region militarily, trying to stage and organize their own revolutions against their governments. So there's a lot of these political factions that start to prop up, and these political factions are writing letters to ambassadors, and sometimes directly to representatives in Parliament and things of that nature, asking for support and money in exchange for territory. And Britain's really hesitant about getting involved in some of these foreign affairs, specifically in Turkey, which is still technically Europe, but there's this like spirals out of control publicly, and then Britain is faced in a position to have to deny, and France is in a position to have to deny, and nothing is ever really set in stone with these agreements. It's all sort of wartime propaganda and wartime chaos. So what ends up happening is there becomes an Irish revolt, and if you know anything about medieval history, you know that Ireland and Britain have constantly been at war with each other, and so an Irish revolt of like 2,000 people springs up, and they occupy a post office. And it's really only 1,000 of them that actually go and occupy this post office, but Britain is forced to go and send a battleship to this region, and they essentially blow up this post office in order to stop this revolt, because it causes a bunch of civil unrest, and it's just chaos all over. And that's something I learned about World War I that I didn't know. I didn't know very well at all. It was pretty shocking to see all of the similarities as to what's going on in the world today and what happened during World War I, with just countries blaming each other and conflict ensuing and nothing really getting resolved. That's something you should probably pay attention to, just as an average person. But just because war isn't declared doesn't mean war isn't happening. And that happened with World War One. Everybody was in denial that this was World War One. Even whenever Germany invaded France, it was the rest of the world and the rest of Europe was just sort of like, oh no, this is just a conflict. This will resolve itself. Surely this won't last. This can't last. This is preposterous. There's no way that this would go on for very long. And there was countless article after article after article that was written about the beginning of World War One that was essentially denying its existence. People were in denial that it was going on and that it was as serious as some of the other media outlets were making it seem to be. And World War One was just it was just extremely catastrophic, and I'm still reading the book. I'm probably about halfway through it now. But just to give you an idea of like how catastrophic it was, an estimated total of 14 million soldiers were killed. And that's just soldiers. It's estimated that close to 6 million or 8 million civilians were killed. That number is, depending on where you're looking at, it goes up and down quite a bit because the way that the number is counted takes into consideration. And something crazy like 500,000 horses died during World War One. But yeah, so that's my World War One update for now. I'm obviously going to keep reading it, and I'll be giving more updates as I keep going on with it. But I'm really excited to finish this book because it's just jam-packed with information, and I hope I can recount the second half of the book as well as I've recounted the first half so far. The first half of the book's just really confusing because it jumps around a lot, so I'm thinking maybe the second half will be easier to talk about. But anyways, thanks for listening.